Does this look a little bit confusing? Don't worry, your screen is not broken and YouTube is working perfectly. This is false color, by far the best way to expose your footage in camera. And I'm gonna start right now. Now, there are many tools that you can use inside your camera to expose your footage correctly. You've got some basic tools, like for example, your exposure meter or even your histogram, or if your camera's a little bit more advanced, you might have access to maybe a waveform or even zebras. But in my opinion, the best way to expose your footage is by using a video overlay called false color. Now, false color is a video overlay, so it doesn't affect your video output. It's just an LCD overlay, like for example, peaking, which shows you what's in and out of focus, as well as zebras, which shows you what is overexposed. So don't worry, this isn't what your footage will look like out of camera. Now, false color uses a metric called IRE, which stands for Institute of Radio Engineers, which are the people that basically created false color. And it uses this metric and displays it in a color value. Now, something to bear in mind that not all cameras can actually use false color. At the moment, I'm using my Canon C70, but for example, my Canon R5 doesn't have false color built in, which is a little bit of a shame, but I do get why. It's more of a hybrid camera. Usually false color is only available for certain video or cinema cameras. To get over this hurdle, you can actually use a field monitor, which is what I'm using at the moment to actually record this display. A field monitor like my Atomos Ninja allows you to use certain video overlays that maybe your camera might not have. So don't worry if your camera doesn't have false color built in. Simply buy a field monitor that has false color built in and allow you to basically view it via HDMI. So how can we use false color to better understand our exposure, and how can we utilize it to get better exposure in camera? Well, all false color does is it displays different exposure values in color using IRE, which is, we're gonna go through the color bands in a second. Now, something to bear in mind, false color annoyingly isn't universal, and it really depends on the type of monitor and camera you're using. To check to make sure what color means what inside your camera, what you'll need to do is have a look at your false color index. Now for Canon, my Canon C70, this is the false color index, but it might be different to your camera, so please bear that in mind when watching this video. Okay, so let's start off with the very first color, and that is purple, which represents 0 IRE, which basically means it's pure black. So these particular pixels contain no information, which is something you definitely want to avoid in camera. Next you've got is blue, which is 0 to 10 IRE, and this is just before black clipping. This contains some information, but it should be really represented as very, very dark. So again, something you do want to avoid unless you're intentionally underexposing your footage. Okay, so next we've got is dark gray, which you can, I think, can see about over here. And again, this kind of represents your underexposed areas of your video. Again, it's something you want to add into your footage, but you want to make sure that it's predominantly in your underexposed or shadow areas of your footage. Next we've got is green, which is a really important color. Now, when using false color, it's really important to try and expose the skin tones correctly. Again, every camera's got a slightly different dynamic range, so if we try and have a singular point where we try and focus and try and expose, then that's really important. So when exposing using false color, I always try and make sure that my greens are found within the mid-tones of my skin tones, which is really important. So if we have a look at the video overlay at the moment, you can see that there's a lot of green in my beard here, which is where the mid-tones are found predominantly in the photo. You can also find some green in the background where this light is just hitting it. So that's really important. You want to make sure that your greens are predominantly in the mid-tones. Next you've got is gray, which is slightly above green, but not overexposed. Again, this is predominantly where you can see most of my face. Next you've got is pink, and this is one stop over green. So you're wanting the highlights predominantly. So for example, in my skin tones, you can see just about here or just where my eyes are, there's a little bit of pink. So this is your overexposed or highlight sections of your image. Again, when it comes to skin tones, you want your mid-tones to be green and your pinks to be your highlight regions. And then second to last, you've got yellow, which is just before white clipping. So this is your 90 to 100 IRE. So basically blue, just the opposite for overexposed. So if you're ever photographing or videoing anything, maybe with bright lights, yellow might be represented within your photo. I do try and avoid yellow if I can, because again, that's not a lot of information, but it's okay as long as you're intentionally overexposing your footage. And then lastly, you've got red, which is 100% or 100 IRE, 100% white clipping basically, so you've got no information. The only time realistically you should see red in your footage is if you're filming indoors and there's maybe a window outside and you're photographing and there's a little bit of maybe cloud outside, or if you're photographing outside and you've got the sun directly in your shot. Basically, there's no information within this particular area of your video. So again, something you do want to avoid unless you're intentionally overexposing your footage. So as you can see, using false color is incredibly helpful and far better than any other exposure tools. Zebras are really helpful, but they only show you the highlight regions, or waveforms are really good, but they only show you on a horizontal plane, where false color shows you exactly what is exposed in what region. So you can see that the background is darker than the foreground, for example, or maybe you're overexposed because there's red appearing in your shot, or underexposed because there's blue and purple. It's incredibly helpful because it visualizes what is exposed in what area. Instead of maybe your exposure meter that globally shows you if you're over or underexposed, false color shows you exactly what part is and isn't exposed, which is incredibly helpful. Now, granted, it is a little bit of a learning curve because you are viewing basically a black and white image with some color matrix appearing over it, so it is a little bit confusing, but after using it a couple times, hopefully you'll get the hang of it, and in my opinion, it is by far the best way to expose your footage. It also helps you to get better compositions, I think. Sometimes, or at least I found that I actually like a lot of contrast within my interviews. I like adding light, not necessarily in the shot, but creating a lot of contrast, like you can see with this shot here, and that's really helpful to see because you can visualize it through the color, your false color index. So that's really, really helpful. And also you can see when your skin tones are correctly exposed. Now, do bear in mind, skin tones do vary in color. Again, it uses IRE as a metric, so it doesn't use the luminosity of the colors, for example. Like my shirt is quite dark here because it is physically dark. It doesn't show you the luminance of what the output is, it shows you visualizing it through IRE. So that's something to bear in mind. So when you are representing different skin tones within your video, you do need to treat them slightly differently. But most of the time, as long as your midtones are green and your highlights are pink, you're pretty much good to go. So there we go. That is how you can use false color inside your videos to get far better exposure. So try it out at your next shoot, maybe your interview or next wedding, and hopefully you'll get better results. I've been James for Video Fever, and I'll catch you guys next time.